Now it is a straight number that says if you are working 30 hours or more per week at a nonprofit or a combination of nonprofits that add up to 30 hours a week, you are full-time in the eyes of PSLF.
PSLF is also having some changes, like the way that you qualify. So full-time employment, there's changes around how they define your employer and then also what they consider full-time, because you always have had to been full-time employed in order to qualify. These can be massive for some people.
Oh yeah, if it applies to the individual, like these are game changers to some employment decisions that we see and some plans overall. Probably the easiest one is that the definition of full time has been simplified. And so now it is a straight number that says if you are working 30 hours or more per week at a nonprofit or a combination of nonprofits that add up to 30 hours a week, you are full time in the eyes of PSLF. And so
Mhm.
now this gives a definite definition of if my employer, if and I send them a certification form and it says 30 hours a week and they sign off on that, that's going to count no matter what they call full time
Hmm.
or not.
Yeah, that's a win as well. That's making it more generous. SLF, so 30 hours is the line. That is much more straightforward.
Certainly helps out for anyone that's just looking to scale back or a spouse
Mhm.
that's looking to scale back and still not take PSLF off the table completely.
What about the other changes related to your employer? This is definitely a little bit more complicated, but it's
So
it's a big win too.
this one is less straightforward, but still certainly a help here. And that's that the definition of a PSLF qualifying employer has now been expanded, where particularly in states like California or Texas. So if there's a state statute that says that you cannot be directly employed by the nonprofit, and that's very common with, for example, Kaiser Permanente docs over in California would be a very common example. You can now go to the nonprofit level and get their contact and their employer identification number to put in as your employer and
Hmm.
get credit, where you used to have to go to, if you went to Kaiser Permanente, for example, not a nonprofit, so it just wouldn't count. That's your employer. But if you're a Kaiser Permanente doc that works at nonprofit hospital A, if you go to nonprofit hospital A that wasn't allowed to employ you directly, they can sign off on that employment. So it expands that for certain individuals. So
Yeah, and it has to be that your location, wherever you're at, has to have. It's designed for the setup where the law says you cannot be directly employed by a nonprofit hospital, and so they've created these like employer organization workarounds that are typically for profit. In that sort of circumstance, you can go straight to the nonprofit and get them to sign off on your employer certification, and therefore begin to qualify for PSLF.
exactly. Yeah, this is a brand new change effective as of July. But if you think that this applies to you, I'd be, communicating very proactively with the hospital or the nonprofit that basically your provider, your employer is a contractor of. Find out who you should go to certify that, and then you can get that employment certified at the hospital level instead of your direct level, like where who
Mhm.
signs your paychecks, right?
Yeah. So first thing is you got to figure out if you're in an area where laws require you to be not employed by nonprofits. Second of all, if you're in one of those areas, go to the directly to the nonprofit, not to this organization you're working for, like Kaiser Permanente. You're going to the main Kaiser, like the nonprofit hospital division of Kaiser, and not your physician employer for profit group. And you're talking to them about like, who do I talk to get sign off on this? And I
Yes.
imagine they'll be like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" I just can see that happening. So I wouldn't be surprised of that response. And then if I hear that response, I'm going to start sending them all these laws and provisions and student loan stuff. Be like, here's the stuff. It's right here. And then you'll have, probably have to get them caught up to speed. But that's a good thing.
Yeah. Probably the easiest thing to reference is on studentaid.gov. They have a what is a qualifying employer FAQ. And in there's a drop down that kind of explains in a couple of paragraphs to at least get the conversation started.
Is it just that situation, nonprofit, like where you're not allowed to be employed by the nonprofit setup? Or wasn't there some changes around independent contractors?
Yeah. And it's basically the same issue at play. You may be structured in a way that you're employed by a contractor organization.
Like a team health?
Potentially, I'd say Texas or California, put yourself on red alert. that this could apply to you. Other states, almost no chance in most other states. But then it would also apply to if you're in the same situation where by state statute, you can't be employed by the nonprofit, but you're directly contracting with them and being paid 1099, or you have your own S Corp or something like that. That still could work out as long as you're being prohibited from that direct relationship by state statute.
So like a team health physician working for team health or their independent contractor team health, but say they're working in a nonprofit hospital.
Yeah, that would come down to the state, whether if it's set up that way because you are not allowed to be directly employed, then that
Mhm.
counts. If it's
Part I
just
am curious about in that scenario is like, I know team health typically is not in existence to work around that rule. Like team health is designed to work nationally and independent and allow for physicians to be independent contractors. Whereas these physician Kaiser example employment groups are designed to employ physicians because they can't work directly for the nonprofit. So I wonder how that works.
I'd say the worst case scenario is you go down this road and you ask the hospital and say, "Hey, is there somebody that can sign off on this?" And they say, "No, you dummy. That's not how
Hmm.
the state works, right?" Like, "Oh, okay, sorry, I'm not a student loan expert." Okay. But yeah, I think there's certainly gray areas that are going to be sorted out over time as well, which
Yeah.
seems to be the case with any of these student loan changes that happen too.
Right. Okay, so California, Texas for sure. If you're actually like physically working in a nonprofit hospital, but
Mhm.
like you're not employed directly by a nonprofit, this is
You're a
something you
likely
for sure
candidate.
at least should be looking into and kind of starting to do a little homework on this. And it could be a big potential benefit.